I was in really two minds about doing this conference, but and what I decided after much kind of soul searching was that I would do it if I could reprint this issue of Asylum Magazine that's nearly 20 years old. We published it around the time that the Diagnosis of Exclusion report came out, and lots of survivors were involved in this special issue. So I felt like if I could reprint this issue for this conference, it would be, a good thing to do. And we've actually sold out of them. So I printed 100 copies, and we didn't have enough for this issue. So I'm really hoping that that's going to have an impact on people's consciousness and thinking around BPD and the whole diagnosis and the stuff around it.
And for people that don't know Asylum and don't know what's in that issue, tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so as I said, this issue was guest edited by a group called Women at the Margins at the time, and they were a group of women who had been diagnosed with BPD who were very critical of the diagnosis, and so it's got lots of stories and criticisms of the system in it. And we've been trying to continue this work throughout in Asylum, so the current issue, which we've also been selling here, has got some articles about BPD as well, and we're now encouraging people to have more. We're now having more articles about things like autism and other issues and other experiences and identities that get pathologised as borderline personality disorder.
Who writes for Asylum, and how do you decide as an editor, not so much what to publish, but kind of what you're covering in this mad mental health world? How do you choose the themes and the topics?
Well, I guess it's chosen by our readers, really, because they send us stuff, and they use us because we have quite a good following of readers amongst the community, the survivor and activist community. Then people tend to send us material about what's going on in their lives and what's going on in terms of activist work. So we really prioritise survivors and activists to write for us, and also workers and other people who work in the system, and lay people. We do have some academics writing as well, and we really prioritise stuff that's going to hopefully raise awareness about some of the issues that people are facing. We want to promote marginalised voices, people that aren't necessarily getting their voices heard in other more mainstream outlets. So we don't really publish things like classic kind of recovery stories and stuff like that. We try and publish stuff that's maybe uncomfortable to people to listen to, that's controversial in some way, that's critical in different ways, but that offers some hope for people. So, and I think it's really important for people's voices, people who are not heard, for their voices to get heard, and I think that's what Asylum's always been about, and this is what this issue was particularly about, but all our issues since have been as well.
I started subscribing about 5 or 6 years ago, and I've spent my entire career, like more than 20 years, reading mental health research, and I've spent a little bit of time in mental health services and done a lot of work with people who work in mental health services. But for me, the reason I read Asylum is that it keeps me in touch with what's going on at the front line in a way which really, really complements my kind of academic, scientific, reading, and sometimes like massively clashes with that. And so I would really love it if this content could get out to a wider audience, and particularly to the clinicians and the academics and the students who don't know, they're not aware of this. So what are you doing to kind of, I imagine you agree with that.
We would love the magazine to get more widely read. We rely on our subscribers, and we don't get that many institutional subscriptions. Most of our subscriptions are individual subscriptions, mostly, like I say, from individual survivors and activists. And we'd really like more institutional subscriptions. We'd like it in libraries. We'd like organisations to subscribe. We'd particularly like the magazine to get into services. And get into libraries, but we've had a lot of kickback on that from libraries and from services, saying that it's too controversial. One trust said that it didn't think it would support service users' recovery because the material was quite critical of services. But we feel like people have a right to that information, whether they agree with it or not, and service users have a right to that information. And if we can only get magazines and other material like this into services, it gives people more options, and to understand that there are alternatives, and there are other people who might be sharing their experiences and might have some other potential avenues, and not knowing that they're not alone, and just connecting, making solidarity across different experiences and across different organisations and movements and stuff like that. So, I think it's it's a good magazine. We've been, there's a lot of really good stuff in it, but not enough people hear about it. So I made a difficult decision to come to this conference because I knew there'd be a lot of people here who hadn't heard about the magazine. So it felt like it was worth doing, even though it's a difficult thing to do, to ensure that people get access to material like this.
And how has Asylum and all the other stuff, you've been presenting loads of magazines and all that kind of creative work, how's that all gone down with the audience here?
Pretty well, actually. I mean, I think we've had a lot of people coming to the stall saying, wish this is the stuff that we should have been doing here for years. And it's great to hear this kind of stuff. We've had some of the presentations have been controversial, and some survivors have felt quite unhappy by some of the presentations. I have too, and people have sort of left the presentation and fallen into our stall and kind of gone, oh great, oh fantastic, this is important material. I wish there was more of it here, and I've actually managed and found connection through that. So it's felt like important to be here for that, really, and to support people when they felt uncomfortable and unhappy with the presentation, to realise that it's okay, and that maybe they're right to be unhappy, and it's not them, that perhaps there's something wrong with the material that they're hearing, and that it's okay to have that view, and to hear about other people who might share their views as well. So again, it's that solidarity that feels an important function, even though it's unsettling and it's uncomfortable, but sometimes it's difficult.
I'm a mental health information scientist, and when I think about mental health knowledge and evidence, your stuff, zines and Asylum and creative writing and all that kind of thing, is very much part of that. And you recognise that. You recognise that you're part of that. The knowledge, the evidence, and I think a lot of people who work in mental health science maybe don't regard this kind of publication type as evidence. Yeah. And that's maybe why the librarians are saying we can't have that. Yeah. So say something about the role this kind of evidence has.
Yeah, so I mean, being an academic myself and now being a professor, I've taken it on as a mission, really, to make material like this validated in the academy and make survivor literature validated, because for me it's no less relevant than any of the textbooks. In fact, to me, I've learnt much more from publications like this than I have from any academic book I've read, to be honest. And for me, that knowledge needs to be absolutely central. So I make sure that Asylum's on all my courses if I'm teaching, and make sure that articles like this can be referenced. I mean, there's some idea that you should only reference peer-reviewed journal articles as if that's the only knowledge that counts. And this material is often called grey literature, and the idea that it's grey literature is just kind of absurd to me, because it's the most powerful, important literature that I know of. And I'm not saying that scientific literature, other forms of literature, isn't also powerful in its own way and also maybe necessary in some ways, but to me this is the most powerful literature that we have, and for it to not to be validated in the academy is a travesty, because it means that students are not hearing the breadth of information that's out there. And sometimes people might have been in practice for years and have not come across this stuff, and then say, why didn't I learn about this at university or in college? And it's like, well, you should have done.
Yeah. So there's something about the kinds of questions that you answer with this kind of content, and I think health professionals need to be aware that there are questions that they are going to ask during their careers that is best answered by this kind of content. So what are those questions? What sort of questions?
So I don't even know if they're questions, but I think that a lot of the models that when mental health work is taught on professional programs, People are searching for models, techniques, treatments, quick fixes often, and they don't provide answers. They might be helpful in some contexts for some people at some times, but they're not answers. They're technical things that might or may not be helpful for people, and some of them are better or worse than others. But I think what we have to try and understand is the humility that we need as mental health professionals need humility, that models and treatment modalities and all this stuff is just one aspect of things that we do, and all we have to understand is how those things are experienced and the context in which they're implemented. And I think what Asylum is very good at, and survivor publications are very good at, is looking at, well, what's it actually like for the person experiencing those things, and that's what we have to be. That's the kind of, it's the qualities, I suppose, of the sort of sensibilities that we need, that mental health professionals need. Is a curious sensibility, a humble sensibility, a sensibility that they might get things wrong, or we might get things wrong. I mean, I certainly know as an academic, and previously I worked in advocacy, and we got stuff wrong a lot of the time, and learning from that. And I think because Asylum and publications like that are very critical, and people don't like that because it's very critical, but that's how we learn. We learn from when things go wrong, and then we have to face up to when things go wrong. And I think Asylum can be a very difficult read for many people because it's often about when things go badly wrong. But to me, that's what we need. That's where we learn the most. So I'm not sure it provides answers as such, but maybe it helps for people to understand that there are lots of different answers in different contexts. And that yearning that people have for answers is maybe that's where we're going wrong.
Yeah, I mean, for me,
there is an answer, you know.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. That there is some answer, if you like, you know.
Yeah, it's the answer for the bigger questions, isn't it? That are quite hard to formulate. I mean, the thing that it answered for me is, what's it like to experience the mental health system? What do mental health professionals need to know about that experience? And you know, it's a big, and I read like maybe 10 issues before I started to really understand, and I found it really difficult reading, and I still do, but I kind of stuck with it because I had this sense that beyond the kind of jokes and the entertainment that's in there, because there's a lot of funny stuff, there was this sense that I was getting something that I hadn't had from my mental health science years of reading papers. It felt it was like filling in a gap. Absolutely, and it is. I think that's one of the things I have to come back to when I think, cause we have quite a small subscription rate. We don't have a big reach, and I think often I wonder why is that, and I think it is because it's difficult to read. But we have like you say, a lot of humour, a lot of satire. It's quite dark humour sometimes. We do have a lightness, but we don't want to do that thing like news programmes do, of let's finish on a light note type of thing, because it's serious stuff. But there are ways to poke fun at the system that everyone can recognise, professionals can recognise, survivors can recognise. You know, and it's important to be open to that as well. And we always try and include humour in some way in the magazine. It doesn't always work, but I think that is really important. And sometimes, and humour is often a way in which we can open up to critical ideas as well, through satire, through parody. And survivors have really good at that work, and zines are really good at that as well. There's some fantastic zines out there that do such a great job of that. So we try and capture some of that in the magazine as well, as much as we can. But we're always interested in feedback as well, you know, about how we can improve it, how it can reach more people, how we can include more diverse experiences, how we can get the balance right between humour and critique and alternatives. Because one of the things that people have often said to us is, all very well criticising the system, but what are the alternatives? What can we do differently? So we often try and include some alternatives. So each issue we always try and include something about something that's more positive. Like in the latest issue, we've got some stuff about peer respite support,
Unfortunately, there's less and less, or there appears to be less and less options out there for people. And even if there are some, people don't necessarily have access to them. But it's important for people to know that they're there and there is hope. But also important not to forget, not to just bury under the carpet the difficult stuff. The people that we've lost, the people that are still struggling, you know, the so-called unrecovered, the people that aren't able to come to conferences like this. You know, for whatever reason, they don't want to come because they don't agree with it, or they can't come, or they're excluded in many different ways. You know, and that's really sad. But you know, we have to find ways to produce different forms of information that where people can get. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? The world is full of information. It's full of like the internet, everything else, and yet we're not getting it.
It's harder in many ways,
isn't it? We're not getting it. We're not getting what we need to hear.
Yeah.
And yet there's more information out there. So I guess what in Asylum we try and do is pull together some of the really good stuff that we think people need to know. Uncomfortable truths, basically, I guess.